Oh, I'm so glad you made it today. Welcome. I'm John Merriman, and this is your Tuesday morning guitar song. There's an old saying in the music business. It's all about the girl. And I can think of no greater example of this than the Carpenters. The band that was fronted by the brother-sister duo from Downey, California, Karen and Richard Carpenter. Their storyline and their music became all about that girl with the beautiful contralto voice, Karen Carpenter. In fact, if you're familiar with their music, but not so familiar with their history, you might think, well, what did Richard even do in the band? Was he just the keyboard player and the backup singer? Now, public perception always goes to that pretty girl up front, but the reality of the situation, what's going on inside the band, can be very different, and so it was with the Carpenters. Behind the scenes, it was all about Richard. Richard was the founder. He was the creative force, and he was the musical director. He made all the decisions. But let's go back to the start of the story, and you can see how this dynamic plays out. Richard was born in 1946 in New Haven, Connecticut. 4 years later, his sister Karen was born, also in New Haven. Now, Richard was a true musical genius. He was a child prodigy growing up, and everyone was very aware that Richard was destined to be in the music business. Karen, on the other hand, wasn't interested in music. She was more of a play-outside kind of kid. Richard was always inside, studying music, taking lessons. Karen was outside playing softball and roller skating. So their parents would do anything to help Richard, who was the golden child, achieve his dreams of being in the music business. And they even moved the whole family from Connecticut to California when Richard was 17, so he could go to Long Beach State and study music and be close to the music industry. Karen was just starting high school and had to come along. Now, this was an incredibly tight and loving family, and Richard wanted to include his little sister in his dreams. So he told Karen, if you can learn a musical instrument, maybe we can play in a band someday together. Well, that's all that Karen needed. She adored her older brother, and she had a friend in high school with a drum set, so she started learning to play drums. And she worked and she worked and she worked and she got very good. Now, I want to stop the narrative right here and interject a personal note. Karen Carpenter is one of my favorite drummers, and you cannot believe how much flack I've gotten for this over the years. If you're in a conversation with musical geniuses and the topic of who's your favorite drummer comes up, and somebody says, well, Buddy Rich, Lenny White, Billy Cobham, and I say, Karen Carpenter. It's like all eyes are on you in that moment. And there are sentences that are conversation starters, and there are sentences that are conversation enders, and that's an ender. But for me, I've never seen anybody exude so much joy and so much happiness at playing a musical instrument than Karen Carpenter when she's at a drum set. So, let's go back to the narrative now. Well, anyway, Karen worked very hard at the drums and she did become very good. And Richard was good to his promise. When he was about to graduate from college, he started a band called the Dick Carpenter Trio. And he asked Karen, who was now very good at the drums, to be the drummer. The Dick Carpenter Trio played around Los Angeles, and they got a lot of attention, and they even won some contests. And as the story goes, one night, they went to a friend's house who had a recording studio, and he also had a small record company. This friend owned a small record company. They were going to back up a trumpet player. Well, the trumpet player didn't show up. So Richard asked Karen if she would sing so they could practice. And Karen was always very hesitant to sing, but she agreed. Now, Richard had heard Karen sing before, but the owner of the record company, their friend who had the studio, had never heard Karen. and he was blown away by her voice. He had never heard anything like this. And he wanted to release a record of Karen on his small record company, which he did. There was a Karen Carpenter single. Well, it went nowhere and the record company went out of business. But that was the start. That is where they saw Karen might have something here. And from then on, the attention became that fascinating girl drummer with that interesting voice, and Richard became behind the scenes. He became kind of the puppet master, so to speak. Well, you know, in a couple years, they kept doing demos, and they were heard by Herb Alpert, who had the band, the Tijuana Brass. Well, he also had a record company called A&M Records, and he signed them. And the rest is history. They stayed with A&M throughout their career and produced hit after hit after hit. Now then, as we all know, the legacy of the Carpenters was totally consumed by the tragic death of Karen when she lost her battle to anorexia. But I'll say this, I think it would be a further tragedy to let our memory dim of how much joy and wonder and happiness she brought to the world with that beautiful voice of hers. It was not the voice of an angel, it was a voice of deep red roses and warm, sweet honey. So may we never forget how beautiful it was to have Karen Carpenter on this planet. So cheer up! Hey, it's time for the Tuesday Morning Fun Fact! Here's your Tuesday Morning Fun Fact. The Carpenters have the most mispronounced band name in history. There is no band, there is no duo, there is no nothing with the name The Carpenters. Here's the story. Richard Carpenter had the Dick Carpenter Trio. Then he had a band called Spectrum. And then when him and Karen were signed with A&M Records, he had to come up with another band name. So he thought long and hard. And he liked bands with names like Jefferson Starship or Buffalo Springfield or Santana. So he named his new band Carpenters. There was no "the" in front of it. It was just Carpenters. And it was a band name. It was fronted by him and Karen, but also John Bettis, Gary Sims, and Danny Woodhams were also in Carpenters. Now, if you look at all the albums they produced, there is no "the" in front of Carpenters. And you look at the singles, there's no "the" in front of Carpenters like The Beatles or The Doobie Brothers. It was just Carpenters. Now, he was a musician, not an English teacher, and I'm sure he didn't realize what kind of grammatical train wreck he created when he did this. Because proper use of this name would be, for example, a Jefferson Starship is playing at Memorial Hall. It would be Carpenters is playing tonight at Memorial Hall. Well, I'm sure that lasted about 1 week before he even stopped trying to correct people. So don't go out and try to correct people on this, just let it go. It's just a Tuesday morning fun fact. Well, I think it's guitar playing time. I've got one from 1972. It was one of their big #1 hits. So please stay with me. I'll be right back. Thank you so much for stopping by. It is so good to see you. Please do all that social media stuff, like button and share it and all that stuff. Come back next week, and remember, you're never ready for your day without a song in your heart. Bye now.